In February 1973, Montana, most constructors in Flathead County were making identical errors. Poorly insulated cabins that lost warmth and basements that transformed into frigid chambers. Metallic constructions accumulated moisture, leading to widespread decay. Meanwhile, a particular individual was being labeled reckless. The county's most seasoned constructor reviewed his blueprints, declaring, "It's a death trap, plain and simple." But what if this seemingly disastrous concept in building history was actually the most ingenious innovation anyone had introduced in that valley? Envision this scenario: a curved metallic casing resting upon a rock foundation, resembling a military fortification more than a residence. Neighbors driving by expressed disapproval, while local contractors wagered on its eventual collapse. And a single individual, often solitary in his work, staked all his resources on a concept that fused two approaches widely believed to be incompatible. Rock foundations were considered outdated. It was common knowledge they became and remained frigid. Certainly, metallic Quonset huts were inexpensive surplus items, yet they remained unoccupied for a specific cause. Moisture accumulation transformed them into perpetually dripping horrors. To combine these elements was not inventive, it was inviting difficulties. Such was the prevailing opinion until the most frigid winter in 10 years demonstrated their collective error. This day, you will comprehend precisely how a concept once scorned at the timber merchants evolved into the most replicated dwelling within a 50-mile radius. Furthermore, by its conclusion, you will discover the singular figure that rendered all detractors speechless. Should you wish for authentic frontier methods on a weekly basis, strategies that proved effective when survival truly hung in the balance, please subscribe immediately and leave a comment indicating your viewing location. For the occurrences of that particular Montana winter will permanently transform your perspective on warmth generation. We shall now revisit its origin. The individual in question was named Ray Hutchins. A carpenter professionally, a welder due to circumstance, and renowned for his obstinacy. For 3 consecutive winters, Ray had observed his neighbors rapidly depleting large quantities of firewood. Solely to render their residences minimally habitable, the conventional method employed in Flathead County was uncomplicated. Erect a timber-framed dwelling and insulate it to the highest degree financially feasible. Implement a wood-burning stove and maintain its fuel supply without interruption. By February, households were engaged in 16-hour daily burning sessions, solely to sustain an interior temperature of 50 degrees. The subterranean levels presented an even greater challenge. Rock foundations, which enjoyed universal confidence, transformed into thermal drains. Enormous heat conduits which drew warmth downwards more rapidly than any heating appliance could restore it. Thinly poured concrete, lacking a thermal barrier separating the ground from the habitable area. Heating expenses that devoured half a family's earnings during winter. And then came the metal constructions. Excess Quonset huts, those military shelters shaped like curved half-cylinders, were inexpensive and readily accessible post-war, yet constructors steered clear of them. For residential use, the consistent issue was metal sweating, causing condensation to accumulate internally. Surface moisture dripped onto all surfaces, leading to decayed wood, corroded tools, and transforming living areas into frigid, damp discomfort. Ray perceived it differently. He wasn't an urban outsider bringing sophisticated concepts. Having been raised in Montana, he had dedicated 15 years to framing homes. An additional 5 years were spent welding grain silos and barn frameworks. He comprehended both timber and metal. Furthermore, he grasped a truth many builders were too arrogant to acknowledge. The conventional techniques widely endorsed weren't performing effectively. He had experienced the interior of those well-constructed log residences during January's severe cold. He observed families gathered within 6 feet of the heater, as moving further away would make one's breath visible. He witnessed individuals rising every 3 hours to stoke the flames, understanding that allowing the fire to extinguish meant awakening in a house at 40 degrees. He listened to grievances regarding timber usage, noting how a household might consume 4, 5, or even 6 cords in one winter, yet still feel cold much of the time. Ray had also gained sufficient experience with metal constructions to realize that the issue of condensation wasn't inherent to the metal itself, but rather stemmed from inadequate insulation and moisture management. Naturally, an uninsulated Quonset hut serving as a storage shed would accumulate moisture. However, if properly insulated and its humidity controlled, the curved steel enclosure transformed into one of the most energy-efficient forms imaginable. There would be no thermal bridging via studs, no intricate roof trusses dissipating warmth, merely an uninterrupted arch that sheds snow and wind with unparalleled effectiveness. Regarding the problem with stone basements, it was even more straightforward. People were constructing them improperly. They featured thin walls, direct exposure to frozen soil, and virtually no thermal mass. However, by digging sufficiently deep, building with ample thickness, and comprehending the true mechanics of earth-sheltered construction, stone could become an advantage. The soil 8 feet below the surface remained unfrozen, maintaining a consistent temperature of 48 to 52 degrees throughout the year. In Montana, this represented a source of free foundational heat, provided one understood how to harness it. He had been involved in a sufficient number of construction projects to grasp a concept overlooked by many. The issue lay not with the substances themselves, but rather with their application. Stone was not an impediment to warmth. Instead, it offered a remedy if endowed with adequate bulk. The metal structure functioned as an effective enclosure, not a condensation collector. Assuming correct insulation and regulated airflow, by autumn of 1972, Ray took a step that would lead to him being labeled irrational for the following 4 months. His intention was to erect a Quonset hut, an arched steel structure spanning 24 feet in width. This would sit right atop a stone basement, specifically a complete 8-foot deep cellar rather than a shallow base. Its walls, crafted from 2-foot thick local sandstone, were excavated into the ground, ensuring a consistent temperature. The temperature remained constant all year, featuring 2 tiers, stone beneath and steel overhead. A blend of tradition and modernity, combining bulk with effectiveness. Upon the news spreading, reactions were instantaneous. You'll simultaneously suffer from freezing temperatures and waterlogging. The metal will condense profusely. A sump pump will be necessary in your sleeping area, within the stone basement. You've merely created a cooler with an ornate top. Ray offered no rebuttal. He simply persisted with his efforts. This reveals Ray's actual construction and the reason it caused such unease for others. The cellar was the primary undertaking. He excavated to a depth of 8 feet into solid earth. Next, he faced the walls with sandstone blocks, each weighing around 40 pounds on average. With the walls being 2 feet thick, this amounted to roughly 4,000 pounds of rock. For every linear foot of wall, the floor was left as densely packed soil. Without a concrete slab to serve as a heat conductor, the soil maintained a steady 48 degrees to 52 degrees all year long, naturally insulated by the ground itself. Small windows were fitted by him on the southern face of the stone cellar, merely enough to admit the winter sun during the periods of its low angle. In the basement's core, he constructed a wood-fueled masonry heater. It was engineered to slowly emit warmth for a duration of 18 to 20 hours. Those stone walls would take in the heat, keep it, and then let it out little by little. The masonry heater itself was vital, demonstrating the principle of thermal mass. Ray opted not to put in a typical metal wood stove, as such units burned intensely and quickly. Rather than having most of the heat escape via the chimney, he built a Finnish-style contraflow masonry heater, employing fire brick and a winding flue system which made hot gases traverse, before making their way out through several channels. 70 to 80% of the heat produced by burning was captured this way, slowly radiating it into the stone basement all day long. The sheer mass of the heater itself, acting as another thermal battery, consisted of roughly 2,000 pounds of brick. A single morning firing ensured it remained warm to the touch until the subsequent morning. Adding the 4,000 pounds of stone per wall segment, an underground thermal reservoir had been created by Ray, with the earth safeguarding it from external temperature changes. The heat was absorbed and held by the stone. The complete system operated like a huge, slow-releasing radiator. Yet this is the particular detail that most individuals failed to notice. It wasn't Ray's intention to warm the basement to 70 degrees. Instead, he was heating it to 60 to 65 degrees, just sufficiently warm to emit a constant upward heat flow towards the living space overhead, but without becoming so hot as to squander energy. Here, the 2-level layout became crucial. Subsequently, the Quonset appeared. Ray acquired a pre-assembled Quonset kit, originally military surplus. Comprising arched steel ribs and corrugated metal skin, he put it together. He placed it right atop the stone basement walls, securing the joint with an unbroken rubber gasket. With a sill plate treatment, the Quonset served as the primary living floor. Inside, it featured a sleeping zone, kitchen, and seating spanning 16 feet in width and 24 feet in length. The central arch provided a 10-foot ceiling height, yet this particular aspect infuriated construction professionals. The Quonset's inside was insulated by him using 6 inches of fiberglass bats. Subsequently, he applied a vapor barrier and then tongue-and-groove pine paneling over it. To harness solar warmth throughout the day, he installed 2 sizable skylights at the arch's apex. At each gable end, he fitted adjustable vents to regulate air movement and inhibit the accumulation of moisture. The moisture barrier was positioned on the warmer face of the insulating material. This was vital to stop dampness from contacting the chilly metal exterior. He sealed every joint. An unbroken air barrier was established by him. This was not based on conjecture. This represented intentional moisture control. The adjustable vents enabled him to expel damp air, generated by cooking and bathing prior to its condensation in any location. During the winter season, the skylights fulfilled a twofold function. With the sun positioned low on the southern horizon, those skylights oriented towards the south absorbed direct solar rays. Even during chilly weather, the sun would warm the indoor atmosphere, which ascended organically to the arch's highest point, subsequently descending as its temperature dropped. Unrestricted warmth. In the summertime, Ray had the option to open both the vents and the skylights for generating cross-ventilation, expelling warm air, and drawing cooler air upwards from the cool, shaded stone basement beneath. The scientific principles were robust. The basement, constructed of stone, functioned as a heat reservoir, taking in warmth from a brick stove, and the consistent temperature of the earth subsequently emitting it upwards into the Quonset. The insulated metallic exterior retained that heat, preventing any thermal escape via the roof, and directed radiant energy downwards. The 2-story layout established a natural layering of temperatures, with warmer air ascending into the habitable area, and cooler air descending into the lower level where the stone structure would rewarm it. He even constructed the outdoor stone stairway with a deliberate space for air between its treads and the basement's wall, serving as an intentional thermal barrier to hinder the transmission of cold. Ray elucidated these concepts to a handful of individuals. However, the majority paid no heed. Seasoned construction workers perceived hazards at every turn. Metal accumulates condensation, they asserted. Timber framing is essential for ventilation, they argued. Concerns arose regarding the structural integrity. Specifically, if the masonry walls would be capable of bearing the Quonset's mass. They also questioned the expense, particularly under heavy snow conditions, stating a conventional dwelling could have been erected for half the price. The contractors in the area expressed their opinions more directly. One individual, a highly regarded stonemason named Victor Carroll, he was present outside the construction location one November afternoon and declared audibly for the entire team that rock basement will lose warmth more rapidly than you can generate it. Furthermore, once that metal begins to perspire, your sleeping quarters will resemble a constantly dripping cavern. Victor possessed 3 decades of experience constructing stone foundations. He was aware that stone became cold and remained so. This was common knowledge. The concept of transforming a stone cellar into a warmth emitter appeared illogical. From his perspective, stone extracted heat from structures. That was simply how physics worked. However, Victor's thoughts centered on slender stone walls directly touching frozen soil. He failed to consider walls 2 feet thick, externally insulated by 8 feet of earth, and regularly heated by a high-mass masonry unit. This constituted a completely distinct setup. Ray endeavored to clarify the disparity. Victor departed. Individuals not only questioned the structural design, but also the concept of a dwelling that lacked a conventional appearance. "That isn't a residence," someone murmured at the hardware store. "It's more like a fortified shelter topped with a barn." Ray persisted with his labor. He possessed knowledge unknown to them. He understood that thermal mass does not dissipate warmth when externally insulated and internally supplied with heat. He was aware that metal avoids condensation when the vapor barrier is managed and adequate airflow is provided. He also recognized that a structure with a modest profile and a curved roof sheds wind and snow more effectively than a pointed frame. Nevertheless, none of those points would be significant until winter's arrival. By the month of December, Ray had taken up residence. The Quonset structure had been completed. The subterranean heating unit was in place. For several weeks, the rock walls had been absorbing the surrounding heat, and the critiques grew more severe. Victor Carroll was no longer merely doubtful, he became outspoken, informing patrons at the eatery that Ray had constructed a problematic asset. He asserted the stone would behave as a thermal absorber, extracting heat from the habitable area and transferring it into the frigid soil. He claimed the metallic exterior would generate internal frost during chilly evenings, and that dampness would gather within the space between the insulation and the interior cladding, making the entire edifice uninhabitable. Come February, an additional builder, a framing specialist known as Gil Sanderson, expressed even stronger disapproval. He had witnessed Quonset structures utilized as storage facilities, as well as equipment shelters, and had personally encountered the issue of condensation. If you place individuals inside, he remarked, their respiration, their cooking, their inherent body warmth, all of it will condense on that frigid metal. You'll awaken to find ice coating the interior of your overhead surface. Gil had been employed in the construction industry for 22 years. He had erected house frames during severe winters, had observed what succeeded and what didn't, and based on his personal experience, he believed metal structures were intended for equipment, not for human occupancy. He had traversed an unheated Quonset hut in January, observing frost as thick as a finger. It coated the internal ribs with drip lines extending down to form puddles on the floor. The entire interior shell was damp and freezing. The notion of living within one, sleeping or raising a family inside one, seemed reckless to him, even with added insulation. He informed a group at the lumberyard, "You would still be sleeping beneath a frozen metal roof. That's not a dwelling, it's a gamble." And it wasn't only Quonset huts that caused people concern. The stone basement troubled them even more. Victor Carroll consistently emphasized this point. Stone, in his opinion, was the issue. "I've constructed foundations for 30 years, he stated. He explained, "And I can tell you, stone becomes cold in winter and remains cold. You cannot heat stone. Stone provides no warmth." He had observed this in every basement he had ever worked on. Chilly stone walls and frigid stone floors led families to avoid their basements. From November through March, as it felt like stepping into a refrigerator. The concept that Ray's basement would somehow produce warmth, store it, and radiate it upwards appeared to be mere wishful thinking. It wasn't solely professionals. Neighbors also offered their opinions. One family, who had resided in the valley for 30 years, stated it plainly. "A true man constructs a log house and keeps the fire burning, unlike that structure which is hiding from winter." The criticism contained a cultural dimension that extended beyond mere engineering. Within Flathead County, one's dwelling conveyed a message about its owner. A log cabin, for instance, signified an appreciation for heritage. You comprehended diligence, were unafraid of nature's forces, confronted winter directly, and kept the hearth burning. You persevered, yet a subterranean curved metal shelter appeared to be a sanctuary, suggesting an individual attempting to evade hardship, rather than confronting it. Though not explicitly stated, the underlying feeling among people was evident. Should one be disinclined to rise every few hours to tend a fire, they were deemed unsuitable for Montana. Ray offered no reply. He simply ignited his brick stove daily. He allowed the cellar to warm and observed the apparatus function. Subsequently, January commenced during its second week. The mercury plunged to -15 degrees Fahrenheit. By the middle of the month, it had fallen to -22 overnight. A frigid air mass became stationary above western Montana. For 11 consecutive days, the temperature gauge remained below zero. Peak daytime temperatures fluctuated between -5 and -10 degrees. Throughout Flathead County, households found themselves in a state of emergency. Residents continuously consumed firewood, replenishing their stoves every 4 hours and rising at 2 a.m. to sustain embers. Dwellings, typically maintaining 55 degrees, now struggled to exceed 45. Cellars transformed into icy chambers. Water conduits ruptured within confined spaces. Individuals began slumbering in their main living areas, positioning themselves as near to the heating unit as possible, layering wool throws and down-filled sleeping bags. A particular household, the Callahans, consumed an entire cord of cut pine within half a week. With 3 small children, they dared not allow the flames to extinguish during the night. Jim Callahan programmed his alarm to sound every 3 hours solely for the purpose of refilling the furnace. As the initial week concluded, he appeared as though he hadn't rested in 4 weeks. A different nearby resident, an elderly pair known as the Haverfords, abandoned efforts to warm their entire dwelling. They sectioned off the sleeping quarters, insulated the doorways with coverings, and resided solely in the cooking area and main parlor. Despite these measures, the internal temperature remained around 45 degrees. They donned outerwear inside and slumbered in thermal jumpsuits. Utility expenses for warmth surged. A single household consumed 3 complete cords of timber within a fortnight. Could they possibly make it last until March? Subsequently, the snowstorm arrived. On the 6th of February, a low-pressure weather pattern deposited 22 inches of snowfall over a 36-hour period. Gusts of wind reached speeds of 40 miles per hour. Temperatures plummeted to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Certain parts of the county experienced power outages. Thoroughfares remained impassable for 3 entire days. Individuals had to fend for themselves. The severe snowstorm delivered more than just snowfall. It also brought sustained winds ranging from 25 to 35 miles per hour. Wind blasts exceeded 40 miles per hour. Such powerful winds don't merely intensify the sensation of cold, they actively remove warmth from buildings. It penetrates every fissure, every opening, and every vulnerable spot in a structure's exterior, extracting heat. Timber-framed residences creak beneath the strain. 4 feet of snow accumulated against the northern facades. Cold air currents infiltrated through window casings, door frames, and power receptacles. Household measures included placing towels beneath doors and taping plastic over windows solely to mitigate heat escape and the ingress of cold. Negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit represents a uniquely intense chill. This is the sort of cold that causes respiratory discomfort upon inhalation, transforms motor oil into a thick goo, and cleaves unseasoned firewood when ignited, due to internal moisture freezing and expanding more rapidly than the wood can accommodate. This proved to be the ultimate challenge. Pay close attention, as the subsequent events shamed everyone who had labeled Ray's architectural plan a death trap. Victor Carroll paid a visit on the 3rd day of the severe snowstorm. His purpose wasn't to assist, but to ascertain if Ray had succumbed to the cold. He rapped on the outdoor stone stairway entrance, anticipating he'd discover Ray huddled beside a blazing hearth, consuming firewood at the same rapid pace as others. Conversely, Ray answered the door wearing only a t-shirt. The internal temperature within the Quan residence registered 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Victor remained stationary, with snow accumulating on his shoulders. The wind sliced through the exposed valley at negative 30 degrees. He gazed intently and inquired, "How much wood are you consuming?" Ray responded with a smile. "I ignited the heating unit yesterday morning. I haven't attended to it since then. Such a feat seemed impossible." Not amidst these frigid conditions, nor with such powerful gusts. Victor's personal dwelling, a robustly constructed log home featuring 6 inches of fiberglass insulation and a contemporary barrel stove, maintained a temperature of 48 degrees. Even though they were burning wood every 4 hours, his spouse had telephoned him earlier that day, inquiring whether they ought to relocate to family in the city. The heating appliance was operating at maximum capacity, yet they were unable to raise the house temperature beyond 50 degrees. Yet, there stood Ray, a full 36 hours post his final fire, clad in shirt sleeves, within a metallic structure that everyone had predicted would be an unheated space. Victor requested entry. Ray moved to the side, confirming the reality. This is what was genuinely occurring within Ray's residence, and the figures are undeniable. The subterranean stone level, containing 4,000 pounds of sandstone per linear foot of wall, had been accumulating thermal energy from the masonry heater for 2 months prior to the onset of the snowstorm. These walls were completely saturated with heat, emitting consistent warmth at approximately 62 to 65 degrees. The earthen flooring, insulated by 8 feet of soil, maintained a constant 50-degree temperature. Whenever Ray ignited the masonry heating unit daily, the stone absorbed the warmth and gradually dissipated it throughout the subsequent 18 to 20 hours. The warm air naturally ascended through the open stairway into the Quonset's living space, situated above the insulated metal structure. This warmth was retained by 6 inches of fiberglass along with a vapor barrier. Wind and snow were effectively shed by the curved roof. The skylights, which faced south, featured double-pane construction. Even when skies were cloudy, these captured solar radiation. This contributed passive warmth during the limited hours of daylight. The design of the masonry heater proved crucial in this context, in contrast to a typical metal stove, which promptly released the majority of its heat, sending the remainder up the flue. Ray's completed masonry heater, however, retained 70 to 80% of the heat generated by combustion within its substantial brick mass. This 2,000-pound thermal reservoir emitted warmth for an entire 24-hour period. When integrated with the stone walls, Ray had devised a heat retention mechanism that did not necessitate a constant flame. Consider the implications of this. The majority of wood-burning stoves function on an active heating principle. Wood is burned, heat is generated, and most of it escapes through the chimney. This process is repeated by them every few hours. Ray's setup conversely functioned on the basis of accumulated heat, a single burn, energy captured within thermal mass, and then gradually released over a full day. This represented the distinction between a short-distance runner and a long-distance runner, sharing the same overall energy output, but employing an entirely different method of delivery. Furthermore, the stone basement wasn't solely accumulating heat from the fire. It additionally gained from the consistent ground temperature found 8 feet below the surface. Throughout the year, the soil in Montana maintains a temperature range of 48 to 52 degrees. While insufficient to heat a dwelling independently, this provides a significant benefit when outdoor temperatures plummet to -30. The stone walls did not lose warmth to the frozen earth. Instead, they were shielded from it by 8 feet of soil. Their only contact was with consistent, moderate temperatures beneath and warmed air above. This led to excellent thermal stability. Whereas his neighbors were stoking fires for 16 hours daily merely to sustain 45 degrees, he elevated his home's temperature. He consistently maintained between 68 and 72 degrees with just a single daily firing. Occasionally, he would forgo firing for an entire day, and the temperature would only decrease to 65 degrees. Now let's contrast this with typical residences in the vicinity. During the cold spell, a conventional wood frame house operated a modern wood stove without interruption. Its interior temperature fluctuated between 42 and 55 degrees. Over a 2-week period, the consumption amounted to 1.5 cords. Let's consider Ray's Quonset-style residence. Approximately 900 square feet of total living area maintained an interior temperature range of 65 to 72 degrees. Wood usage for the identical 2-week duration was 1/3 of a cord. This represents a 65% reduction in wood consumption for a dwelling that was significantly warmer. Ray's closest neighbors, the Callahans, meticulously documented their records that winter as they aimed to determine their fuel expenditures throughout the 14-day cold period. They consumed 1.4 cords of seasoned Douglas fir. Their mean indoor temperature registered 49 degrees. The stove required reloading every 3 to 4 hours continuously, day and night. Ray, in contrast, utilized 0.4 cords during that identical time frame. His home's average interior temperature was 69 degrees. He ignited the masonry heater once every 24 hours, occasionally extending to every 36 hours. The Haverfords, an elderly couple living nearby, had ceased efforts to heat their entire residence. They had sealed off 2/3 of it, focusing on keeping only the kitchen habitable. Even within that reduced area, they consumed 0.9 cords of wood in 2 weeks, yet their temperature remained in the mid-40s. However, what truly astonished everyone during the blizzard, when outside temperatures plunged to 30 degrees and other homes dropped to the low 40s, was Ray's house. Despite continuous fires, Ray's dwelling never registered below 65 degrees. The temperature difference, or delta, between the exterior and interior was 95 degrees. His unheated neighbors, those who had allowed their fires to die out overnight to conserve wood, found their homes at 10 degrees inside. Ray's house, after a single firing 24 hours prior, stayed 55 degrees warmer than theirs. This was 55 degrees warmer during the most severe cold Flathead County had experienced in a decade. That afternoon, Victor descended into the stone basement. He wished to personally observe the heat source. The masonry heater felt warm to the touch but not hot. One could comfortably rest a hand on it. The stone walls emitted a gentle warmth, not intense heat, but a steady, uniform warmth, much like standing near another person. It wasn't a fire. He touched the walls, and they were warm. He examined the earthen floor, noting its dryness and stability. He inspected the ceiling where the quartz met the stone. There was no condensation, no frost, no moisture, just dry wood and warm air naturally ascending into the living space above. The stone basement was not losing heat, instead it was accumulating it. The metal casing was not condensing. It had been correctly insulated and properly ventilated. And operating precisely as Ray had designed, Victor Carroll toured the Quonset structure that day. He felt the stone walls in the basement. Warm to the hand, he observed the ceiling, which was dry. There was no frost, nor any dripping. He stood centrally in the living area and perceived the uniform, radiant heat rising from below. He offered no apology, but he stopped speaking. News traveled more swiftly than the cold front had advanced. By mid-February, once the roads were clear, Ray's Quonset home had become the most discussed building in Flathead County. It began with Victor Carroll the day after his visit to Ray's residence during the blizzard. Victor stopped by the diner where contractors typically gathered for breakfast. He initially said little. He simply ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and listened to the usual complaints about frozen pipes. With high consumption and families barely enduring the cold snap, someone then directly asked him, "Have you seen Ray's place recently? Does that metal structure really hold up?" Victor set down his coffee. "It's 70 degrees in there. He's burning only a third of what we are, and the stone basement is warm." The table fell silent. Gil Sanderson, the framing contractor who had been one of Ray's harshest critics, leaned forward. "Warm stone doesn't retain its heat, especially not in February." Victor met his gaze. "Go witness it firsthand," he urged, and people did. Over the subsequent 2 weeks, Ray received a continuous stream of visitors. Contractors eager to inspect the masonry heater, neighbors wanting to feel the stone walls, and families exhausted from stoking fires every 4 hours, seeking an alternative solution. Ray guided them through the entire system. He elucidated the principle of thermal mass, explaining how stone slowly absorbs heat and then releases it at an even more gradual pace. This establishes a consistent thermal storage unit that avoids rapid fluctuations. He demonstrated the masonry heater's winding flue system and its substantial fire brick interior, contrasting it with a conventional metal stove. He illustrated how it retained heat from combustion rather than allowing it to escape through the chimney. He also showcased the Quonset's vapor barrier, its ventilation setup, and the intentionally designed air gaps and thermal interruptions. While some grasped the concept instantly, others required a 10-minute period in the basement, experiencing the radiant heat emanating from the 2-foot-thick stone walls before comprehension dawned. Among the initial adopters was a young carpenter, Ben Rucker. He had been having difficulty warming a small cabin constructed the prior summer. Its conventional wood frame, minimal insulation, and metal stove necessitated burning 2 cords of wood monthly, yet he remained only marginally comfortable. Following his visit to Ray's residence, he dedicated 3 days to drafting designs. Ben lacked the financial resources for a complete Quonset package, but he grasped the underlying concept. He excavated a partial basement, reaching a depth of 5 feet rather than 8, and erected stone walls on the northern and western exposures, which bore the brunt of the wind. He then insulated the stone's exterior with straw bales before backfilling with soil. He retained his existing wood-framed cabin above ground, but incorporated a compact masonry heater into the partial basement. The subsequent winter saw his wood usage decrease by 50%. Furthermore, his interior temperature became consistent. It was a full 15 degrees warmer compared to the preceding year. News of Ben's achievements circulated widely. Other construction professionals began adopting the methodology. The Pritchard family constructed a root cellar with stone walls underneath their current house. Subsequently, they created an opening from this cellar into their living room floor for ventilation. They placed a compact masonry heater within the cellar. The stone walls absorb warmth from this heater, and the consistent ground temperature emits heat upwards into the dwelling. Their outcomes were not as striking as Ray's. Their residence was already constructed, and modifications to an existing structure presented limitations. Nevertheless, they reduced their wood consumption by 30% and increased the temperature of their basement, which they had previously neglected, by 20 degrees. Of all people, Victor Carroll, the mason who had been Ray's most vocal critic, was the slowest to accept the idea each winter. However, by the end of March, he was once more discreetly visiting Ray's residence, now equipped with a notebook. He inquired about the dimensions of walls, choices of stone, mortar compositions, and methods of insulation. He made no public declaration of altering his techniques. Instead, he simply began constructing basements in a new manner. The following autumn, Victor received a contract to lay the foundation for a new house near Kalispell. Rather than the typical 8-inch poured concrete wall, he put forward a composite plan. 12-inch stone walls on the northern aspect, externally insulated, incorporating a small masonry heater recess into the foundation blueprint. The property owner expressed doubt. Yet, they relied on Victor's expertise. By the subsequent winter, that particular dwelling was performing more efficiently than all similar houses in the vicinity. Victor's professional standing transformed. He evolved from being a conventional mason to the specialist known for constructing warm basements. In a span of 3 years, a dozen different versions of Ray's architectural concept were erected within a 50-mile perimeter of his initial dwelling. A portion of these were complete Quonset structures built over stone, mirroring Ray's own. Other constructions featured partial earth-sheltered layouts, incorporating stone thermal mass on either one or two sides. A small number involved modifications to existing residences where stone cellars were integrated below or behind them, connected via vents or open staircases. While designs differed, the fundamental principle remained consistent: utilize stone as a thermal accumulator, insulate it externally, energize it with an efficient heat source, and permit it to slowly emit warmth over time. The lumber yard in Columbia Falls, located nearby, commenced carrying Quonset kits. By 1975, 6 units were purchased in the initial 12 months. Frank DeLorean, the proprietor, confessed to individuals that he had never conceived of Quonset structures as dwellings until Ray's actions demonstrated their potential. It became apparent, Frank stated, that the military understood efficiency. They had overlooked the area's stone masons and started marketing thermal mass building as a niche service. The complete scientific explanation wasn't always clear to them, yet the results were undeniable. They understood that robust stone walls, when adequately insulated and linked to a home's heating apparatus, had the potential to lower fuel consumption and boost comfort. Such evidence sufficed, even convincing Gil Sanderson. The building contractor, who had previously warned of condensation issues, shifted his perspective in 1976. He erected a workshop for his carpentry venture, employing a comparable design. This structure featured a metal arch over a shallow, stone-lined basement, though he avoided the term Quonset for it. He designated it a thermally efficient workshop, but its conceptual source was clear to all who saw it. The cultural transformation was nuanced yet genuine. In 1972, building a dwelling that didn't resemble a standard cabin or ranch house was considered unusual, perhaps even timid, as if one were evading winter rather than confronting it. By 1976, it was viewed as intelligent, sensible, the sort of action taken by someone who grasped their surroundings and chose not to squander resources. Braden rose to prominence. He didn't launch a company or market any products. He simply occupied his residence, warmed it with one daily fire, and responded to queries from others. Yet its influence was beyond dispute. What was once termed a death trap of a design became a crucial reference. The concept, once considered the most misguided in Flathead County, proved that ancient wisdom, thermal mass, earth sheltering, and radiant heat could be fused with contemporary materials to produce an outcome superior to either method individually. Ray comprehended something many failed to see. Innovation is not always about inventing something entirely new. At times, it entails bringing together elements that are already effective, things people have either forgotten or set aside, and enabling them to perform their inherent functions. Stone has retained heat for thousands of years, and people have used it in construction for just as long. Long before historical records, the Romans utilized hypocaust systems. These systems warm floors and walls, which then continued to radiate heat for hours after the flames had ceased. Both Finnish and Russian cultures engineered masonry heaters that could heat a residence for a full 24 hours with just one firing. Indigenous communities across the Northern Hemisphere erected earth-sheltered dwellings that remained warm in winter and cool in summer by utilizing the stable temperatures of the earth. Ray did not create any of these elements, he merely recollected them and then merged them with a contemporary material, a surplus military shelter built for both efficiency and robustness. This approach proved effective in Montana during the 1970s. The main point is not for everyone to construct a Quonset hut above a stone basement. Instead, the crucial lesson is that the principles Ray applied, thermal mass, appropriate insulation, earth sheltering, highly efficient heat sources, and passive solar gain, are universally applicable. They are functional. Their effectiveness has been perpetual. We simply neglected to notice. Amidst a global context of increasing heating expenditures, rising energy prices, and individuals expending more resources for less comfort, Ray designed a dwelling that achieved the contrary: reduced fuel usage, increased warmth, consistent temperatures, and tangible benefits. This is not mere obstinacy, it is a testament to engineering. The winter of 1973 did more than just evaluate Ray's dwelling. It scrutinized the assumption that contemporary building approaches were automatically superior to older ones. This assumption suggested that progress involved abandoning thermal mass and earth sheltering for lighter framing and active heating systems. Ray invalidated the premise not through abstract theory but with a practical thermometer. The interior registered 55 degrees higher, consumed one-third the timber, and offered 70-degree comfort during a minus 30-degree blizzard. Those figures were truthful and required no explanation. They provided the solution. Now, it's your opportunity. Considering this solution, which component would you integrate into your dwelling today? The thermal mass basement, the efficient masonry heater, the earth shelter concept, or the insulated metal shell? Leave a comment with your location and the most frigid winter you've ever encountered. Let's see how many of us are still attempting to combat winter the difficult way when a more intelligent path exists. And if you haven't subscribed already, please click that button. Every week, I present one authentic frontier technique that proved effective when survival was at stake. No theoretical concepts, no speculation, just proven methods that have endured through time and the most severe winters North America could present. See you in the upcoming video. Educational notice. This video offers historically inspired recreations for educational and narrative purposes. While character names and specific events are fictional, the techniques, concepts, and principles discussed are rooted in genuine historical practices and well-established physical or practical knowledge. All motor applications must be assessed in accordance with current standards, safety guidelines, and applicable laws or regulations. This content is purely educational and does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.